Okay, so we're back. I said that. Okay, so we talked a lot about the first half about the gerrymandered maps and the redistricting. So we're going to go quickly into this topic about last week. Governor Abbott labeled two organizations as
Yes,
foreign transnational terrorist organizations. He labeled the Muslim Brotherhood and Council of on
American
American and Islamic
Islamic
Relations.
relations. Yeah.
And he basically did it by an authority that he was granted back in 2021, 2023, where he can start labeling, certain organizations. If it's, basically the law says anyone more than three that commit certain crimes that have an international component, he can label them to be foreign transnational terrorists. He has used his power so far against some cartels operating across the U.S.-Mexico border. And I think one even a Venezuelan sort of originated gang. But anyway, the first time that he's using it for a civil rights organization, which what CAIR is. There has been some cases which is sort of misunderstood back in 2000, early 2000s. I think the case ultimately in 2007 regarding the Holy Land Foundation, which was a Texas nonprofit that was sending funds to Israel, the West Bank, and to the Gaza Strip, Palestine. And there was a conviction, a very sort of long case that had been brought by George W. Bush administration to label them as terrorists. There are a number of individuals sitting in jail. There was even last week a deportation tied to this case from early 2007. And in that case, the federal government had listed CAIR as what's known as an unindicted co conspirator, which is a very loose way of saying that, hey, we have no evidence about you, about the accusations we're making. However, we think you're tied up, and we'll just add you to the list. They were added along with 300 other individuals and entities at that time. No sort of conviction against CAIR, no other sort of indictments, nothing else coming up to say that they are involved in terrorism, which again at the federal level is a very very serious crime. And a lot of people are unfortunately have been prosecuted for that when they were convicted, and spending time. In fact, some of the people at the Supermax administrative prison in Colorado are people found to be terrorists and terrorist supporters. So anyway, CAIR was never brought into that. They're really known for fighting for civil rights, mainly for Muslim Americans in all sorts of contexts. They're also pretty active in fighting against Israel and fighting for the anti-BDS movement, the boycott, divestiture, and sanctions group that tries to economically boycott Israel. So they are sort of at a sensitive point in topics. There have always been people trying to get CAIR listed. FBI will not work with them in many overt cases. But anyway, that's the background on that. They are sort of akin in the Muslim American community to what NAACP is in the African American community, or MALDAF, or even Anti Defamation League in the Jewish community. Right, they're really fighting for rights, civil rights, free speech, and so forth for Muslim Americans. So them being labeled last week in this very sort of out of the blue, no one knew that. I mean, Muslim Brotherhood has been mentioned, and Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni group, Sunni Muslim group, started primarily out of Egypt back in the 1900s. They were sort of a response to British colonialism in Egypt. They have offshoots all over the Middle East. Turkey. They were in the Gulf countries for a long time, so Saudi Arabia, UAE, and so forth. However, they had their own falling out with Muslim Brotherhood. So, with the exception of Qatar, every other Gulf country is sort of kicked out the Muslim Brotherhood. They had briefly ruled over Egypt back when the Arab Spring had happened, and then they were also forcibly removed from office. So Egypt is very anti-Muslim Brotherhood, at least the Egyptian government is. There are some countries which are a little bit more sympathetic. So Qatar is one, but also Turkey. And Hamas, which is the ruling party of Gaza, but also a terrorist organization, they have historically roots in Muslim Brotherhood. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, things like that. So, but there's no real like one cohesive group. It's not like it's a country, doesn't have any sort of governmental control anywhere in the world, and it's a little bit of like a phantom organization, as many would see. But that's been labeled as a terrorist organization as well. Now we hear in the news, President Trump over the weekend is going to ask and request Secretary of State Rubio to also designate Muslim Brotherhood as as a federally designated terrorist organization. Right now, the only designation is at the state Texas level by Greg Abbott.
So, how many states have labeled the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization besides Texas?
I believe there's no other state that's done it. Florida had threatened to do it. Governor DeSantis, I think the furthest they get was, taking out
Also, a Republican
right
governor.
Muslim Brotherhood and CAIR from being like funded by state funds. But I believe the designation first time last week by Governor Abbott of these
How
states.
many states have designated CAIR as a terrorist organization?
As far as I know, none have.
Just
No state,
Texas.
just Texas, correct? Right. So CARE has filed a lawsuit last week in federal court, and that's been filed in the Western District because CARE also operates through a chapter system. So they have a national entity, but then they have chapters in different cities, throughout the country. So CARE Austin and CARE Dallas have filed suit. I believe CARE Houston is about to file suit saying that the designation by the governor and being enforced by Attorney General Paxton is unconstitutional for various reasons. So that's imminent or has been filed. It's interesting. One thing I'll note is that Attorney General Paxton has been very quiet, even though he is the leading state enforcer of terrorist designation and the consequences of that. He's not said anything publicly so far, so that's remains to be seen. Why
He's also running for senator.
he's running for Senate. He was, I know that, the first part of our podcast today about the gerrymandering, he's been very active on that, right? I don't know where the outcome is, but the ramifications of the proclamation, the three things that they basically do is number one, what's been the headline is CARE and Muslim Brotherhood cannot own any land in Texas, right? Any interest. The law itself is broader. It says anyone included as an affiliate or part of CARE also cannot own land, right? So it remains to be seen whether CARE employees can own land, right, or they're going to get kicked out of their homes, right? Number two is that being labeled as a terrorist organization, if you were to get prosecuted for certain crimes, there's an enhancement in the law that will raise everything up to basically to the next higher level up in seriousness, right? So again, if there's like a protest and there's violence that comes out and they think that CARE is linked up, there's a possibility that this might create a higher prosecution, and some of this stuff is pretty serious, higher felonies. And third and final is that they get labeled to be a nuisance by law, a public nuisance. Anyone can file a private suit. Anyone, I mean literally anyone, but also the county attorney, the DA, and the attorney general can file suit saying that this organization needs to be taken out. They shouldn't be operating in so and so place, and basically making it difficult for them to operate out of Texas.
Do you know of any harm being committed by either organization?
I mean, look,
In Texas.
Muslim Brotherhood is a very loaded subject, right? It has historical legacy. I think a lot of Muslim Brotherhood people will say that they're just a religious organization, but they have got involved in politics throughout the Middle East, right? And there's this whole conspiracy that Obama was a Muslim brother, and he's secretly kind of on if you get stuck in Twitter, you'll see all these conspiracies that he secretly has planted Muslim brotherhoods to take over the countries and do that. Now, in America, it seems a little bit far fetched, but in the Middle East, this theory has come up time and time again, and yeah, there are.
So the harm is that the guy who used to be president may have been a member. That's
Correct.
the harm.
That because his father was Muslim and that alleged to be a secret member of Muslim Brotherhood. So a lot of this stuff is pretty conspiratorial, but they have operated in this way. The Muslim Brotherhood will co-opt the normal, kind of administrative and government structures, right, and basically use that to take over power. That's what they're always alleged to have done. But I've never heard of a Muslim brother directly being here in America. The CARE, I don't see. It's really unfortunate. Even if they have people who might be sympathetic to Muslim Brotherhood or something, they're just sort of getting pasted with this just to make a political cheap shot.
Yeah, you compared it to the NAACP, and I mean, I kind of know how uh, the black community might react if the NAACP was labeled a terrorist organization. But I guess how would you answer a young, we'll say Generation Z Muslim voter now on if they came to you asking, well, why should they vote for the party of a governor who's designated two pretty well known, one of them who operates in Houston, where we are, a nonprofit organization for the benefit of Muslims. Why would any Muslim vote for the Republican Party at this point?
I mean, I think that's what's going to happen in the 2026 elections, right? I think this trying to score cheap points off the back of marginalized groups is going to come back and hurt. I mean, I think all of the efforts that the Republican Party made, and again, maybe they could do a lot more in getting minority votes, right? With their attacks on immigration affecting Latinos, with their attack on, sort of civil rights affecting all minorities, and I think even now this, and again, part of this is you just labeled a Muslim civil rights organization as a terrorist without even coming out and saying, a real basis. I mean, they point to a few people who had been arrested over the years for stuff, which again, I don't take lightly, right? It is serious, right? But that doesn't mean the organization is pushing terrorism. I mean, if anything, they're only doing lawfare in the courts to try to get equal rights, right, for people. So he's not done a really good job explaining it, other than saying, hey, my base is gonna like this because they feel like I'm doing something, right? And I think it's cheap points, but I think it's going to come back to haunt. If not in 2026, in 2028, because I think the Dems are going to say, look, you guys didn't side with us partially because of Biden supporting the genocide in Gaza, but look, we still we made up, and I think that's going to be a challenge that I don't think the GOP. In fact, yesterday in the Houston Chronicle, I was quoted in the paper, and one of the other commentators said Muslims like really tend to side with Republican values. It's just the Republican Party is never embracing Muslims, right?
Well, but
As
you got to
voters.
break it down also. What are the Republican values? You've got stated values, you know, security, protection of the family. These are not values. It's misconstrued that these are now values of one particular political party. These are values, I think, of anybody who is a socially conservative person, whether you're red or blue. We all want to protect our kids. Some of us, we adhere closely to our religious values, right? Whether you're Republican or Democrat. To me, it's just at this point, see, a lot of people are now coming out and saying, well, why do black people stick with the Democratic Party so much? Why do black people stick with the Democratic Party so much? And this is why.
Right.
Because we know there's racism in both parties, but you can't be a part of the party who makes racism or targeting of insular groups as policy.
Right.
Right? And if Democrats came out and said, we're going to label the NAACP as a terrorist organization, you'd probably see mass exodus of black folk from the Democratic Party. And so I don't know how a young voter who happens to be Muslim would really square with or agree with, hey, I'm going to continue to vote for the Red Party just because that's what I've always done. It's almost like, what else do they need to do
Right. Right.
to sort of illustrate that we'll use you for political points? And right now, it kind of sounds surface level, but black folk know this is just the beginning. If this isn't checked here, it could go to a lot of other groups.
Right.
This type of designation. And the orders are not just targeting the organization, it's the membership in the organization. Those are people with kids, with properties, with land in Texas that are now under threat.
Correct.
And so it's like, what else needs to happen? I think in Texas for us to get back to, if we're talking about values, you don't attack the weak. You don't attack someone just because their religion is different from yours.
Right.
Um, I just don't know what else needs to happen, but I feel like um, weighing all the evils out there. The reason why African Americans have largely stuck with the Democratic Party is because the rhetoric is correct. Okay. Everything that comes out of the Democratic platform doesn't necessarily benefit black people all the time or just black people all the time. In fact, most times I think it doesn't. But you don't want to be giving your constitutional vote to someone who is actively um, trying to work out your elimination. Now it's from home ownership, land ownership, whatever kind of ownership. That's how it starts. Then it's going to get you eventually, Next, it could be removing Muslims from the country, which we've
Right.
seen the current president had a Muslim ban to prevent Muslims from coming into the country
Right. Exactly.
for a time period. So, you know, I just don't know what else needs to happen
Yeah.
for folks to
Well,
kind of wake
I
up.
think it's a wake up call again. I mean, I think that's right. I think part of it in the Muslim community is, we don't vote in the numbers. We definitely don't donate in the right numbers, right? And we're a very small group, 2%, 1% of the United States population is Muslim. Very easy to, ostracize us. I mean, we saw this kind of stuff, unfortunately. What happened to Jewish people in the early parts of the Third Reich, right? So I think this is a wake up call. I think it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, you're right, but I think it's tough now convincing a Gen Z young Muslim voter, hey, you need to support the Republicans because a lot of their conservative values align with us. But the next point is, but they're trying to get rid of, actively eliminate us from this country, right? So I think this was a massive overstep by Abbott. I think it'll be interesting to see who and what told him to do it, whether he feels threatened, running for his fourth reelection, right? Or is it that he's just getting some money from somebody who's like, you need to make this an issue for you? And I think that's probably the latter. And I think he also thinks that it's such an extreme step because he's a smart individual. He was Texas Supreme Court Justice. He was the Attorney General, longest serving governor in Texas history. He knows the law. I think he's thinking that I went to such an extreme that this is going to get thrown out. So it's not really going to taint my legacy, but I'm going to get the political points to say I did something, right? To stop the quote unquote, Muslim takeover of Texas, which is a bit ridiculous because again, 2 to 3% of the population. We ain't, we ain't gonna turn a election for a, you know, a mud district really, right? Something as small and as inconsequential as that. But to say we're taking over and Sharia is going to take over, I think that's unfortunate. So I think with that we leave. We shall see how this all turns out. Interesting week. Thanks. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And we look forward to our next podcast.
We're still judging you, folks. We're still judging everybody.
Yeah.
So this is episode 10. We'll see you next time.